Ivanno, thank you so much for coming into the London Data Review.
Thank you for having me.
Can you briefly outline what Retrograde is about?
Retrograde is a fantastic play by Ryan Calais Cameron with the electric pen that just can't stop. I mean, he's 3 years on the trot in the West End now. But this particular dreamscape is set in 1955. If you imagine a corner office, maybe a la Mad Men, the echoes of McCarthyism still about, and a young Sidney Poitier and a writer, Robert Allen Arthur, walk into an NBC studio to sign the contracts to shoot the film that would be A Man is 10 Feet Tall the following year, but edge of the city, featuring Cassavetes, and was a pretty successful film anyway. So having walked into this room, it turns out that in this contract they're being asked much more than anyone could have expected.
That's a really good description. When did you first come across Sidney Poitier in your life? I should make it clear that you play Sidney Poitier in this play.
Yeah. I mean, that was still quite brief. I mean, I guess the question that was being asked is sort of like those of morals and who you're willing to trade in for gold.
Indeed.
A particularly low time for Sidney anyway. But yeah, I am playing Sidney Poitier, a young 28-year-old Sid, who Ryan has written as very real. I think quite often we think of the monolith, the icon, and it's quite popular to look at the end product and somehow ignore the messy work that it takes to get there. I think his authenticity in this moment, based on real events, where Sid was approached by legal people within all sorts of industries and asked to sort of trade in some of his friends, his morals and all that sort of stuff. I believe history showed us that he stayed strong on this front. But yeah, I play a young Sidney Poitier, and what a character to inhabit and what big shoes to fill.
Yeah. When did you first come across him?
I first came across him at the Brit School in South London. A friend of mine, Miles, we used to give each other sort of Christmas presents, and he bought me the biography by Aram Goodsouzian about Sidney Poitier, and since then we kind of nipped over to the BFI back in the day when we were young and active and much more a part of it. And I think the first film I saw was To Sell With Love with Lulu and Patricia Routledge, and sort of set in Carnaby Street, quite a London backdrop. But we were fascinated by not only the elegance of this man, the sort of quite overt values that he sort of wore on his sleeve, but also how subtly through his actions he showed good, and through his work delivered somewhat of a soft advocacy for what he believed in and the values and how he saw the world and would have loved it to see it.
Ryan Calais Cameron has said, because of course this show was at the Kiln last year or the year before, and now coming to the West End, and the writer Ryan Calais Cameron has said that it's as if you're possessed by Sidney Poitier. Does that resonate in any way? Like, how much of him do you feel like you've absorbed over the period of becoming him, if you like?
I quote the play, Barbie, how much do I owe you? I was probably owe Ryan quite a pretty packet for that. But you ask, how is it stepping into...
Yeah, like Ryan said that when you play Sidney, it's as if you're possessed by him, his spirit, if you like. And sort of how does that resonate with you, that idea?
I'm going to be honest, in the spirit of authenticity and candour. Last time we did this play, I lost someone very close to me.
Right.
And who was also a magical emigre with an effervescent spirit. And I think quite a lot of my processing of that was tied into preparing the role. And so there is kind of a beauty and a joy to sort of revisit that person through, I guess, sort of the eyes and the movement of Sidney. So, you know, I kind of got obsessed. I watched everything, read everything, and really fell in love with the spirit of this nature boy, to sort of quote that Nat King Cole song, which is always kind of playing in the background. But sort of from a very rural, very humble beginnings in a tomato farm in the Bahamas and Cat Island.
Yeah.
Sort of travelled the world, walked with kings, stepped on pillars of gold, and reached the height of society. I think if you met everyone, Clark Gable, this all, Audrey Hepburn, like what a life.
Yeah,
and what a life to
absolutely.
chart while also looking at I don't know, I wrote a eulogy for that person. So in some ways you're kind of doing the forensics of a life while doing the forensics of someone else's life. And it was a beautiful but dark symmetry in it. But there's a lot in this for me. And I do really love Sidney. And so revisiting him after 2 years of healing and traveling and all that sort of stuff, it's a great opportunity to share it again with more people after a sold-out run at the Kiln.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got very big themes. I mean, race, class, ambition, who gets to be ambitious, like who's allowed to be ambitious, the people who go back against the grain. And the very fact that this event, this sort of demand for Sidney Poitier to sign a piece of paper that, that sort of denounces people he cares about and issues that he cares about. It's kind of an indication, isn't it, that the authorities were conscious then of both his impact and, like, as a public figure and as movies as a medium.
Yeah, I mean, the importance of storytelling, I can't stress enough to my life and to, I think, sort of wider society and us as a species. I mean, who has control of the stories and how they're portrayed often sort of reflect and instruct us in life and how we move. The US government had him on all sorts of radars. And in that sort of time, sort of 52 to 54, Sidney Poitier could not get any work. And this was potentially tied to the people he was involved with, who were seen as also spicy characters to American society. But I guess I'm missing your question here.
I just said it was interesting that they sort of had were conscious of the impact of him as well as a public figure.
Yes, they were sort of conscious of him as a public figure. And I think he was also quite conscious of himself as a public figure. Another sort of Ryan Calais Cameron quote is that every move he made was tantamount to the representation of 18 million people at some point.
Yeah.
And quite often it was, at the start of his career, about what he chose to do and how important that was. And by the end of it, it was kind of what he chose not to do. And I think this sort of may highlight some guiding points for us nowadays in kind of treacherous times to sort of be aware of the power of the individual and the power of your no, and sort of avoiding sort of group thought and knowing that you are enough and that you don't really have to sort of change or, I guess, sacrifice everything to get across the line.
Yeah.
He definitely didn't.
No, exactly.
And still did.